Welcome, accounting boffins. You with Ashraf Patel and the team. We're busy with cash budgets. The emphasis now is on the payments. So let's have a look at this here. As you can see, if you recall from our previous lesson, we did the cash budget, right? We sorted out the receipts in terms of the cash sale and the credit sale. Remember, just a quick recap, the credit sale was dependent or was needed to draw up your debtors collection schedule. Right, now we're looking at the payments. Obviously, your cash payments would just slot into your cash budget because it's your cash payment of merchandise that was purchased. Like your cash sale was a component that went straight into the cash budget, your cash payments under the payment section of your cash budgets will slot in. However, what happens now with the creditors' payments? Now think about this. If my debtors collection schedule was dependent on credit sales, my creditors' payment schedule will be dependent on credit purchases. So, important for the creditor's payment is your credit purchases. Okay? So once we have that sorted out, we can now move on. When it comes to our creditors, obviously, due process needs to be followed. Number one, what do? A business usually negotiates with its creditors on one, how much time is allowed to pay back, and two, the amount owed to our creditors. Now, what do we normally use as a basis for working? Remember with debtors we said, we expect our debtors to settle their accounts within 30 days, right? Very often, what is negotiated with our creditors is a payment period of 60 days. Now the question is, why 30 from your debtors and 60 to your creditors? Very simple. You expect your debtors to pay you within 30 days, so you have the cash available to meet your obligations, and therefore the longer term you negotiate with your creditors, the better for you. However, you could get creditors that insist that you settle within 30 days as well, right? But that obviously will be entirely dependent on the question that we are dealing with. But ideally, what we want, what we'd expect is debtors pay us in 30 days and we settle our debts within 60 days with our creditors. Okay. Now, when you're preparing the cash budget, you must also calculate the payments to be made to your creditors, right? Like I alluded to earlier on, what's the most important component when you are working out your payments to your creditors? The most important component is your credit purchases. However, that credit purchases will also be dependent on your sales. Now you must be thinking, as Ashraf got his facts mixed up here, why is he talking about sales? Remember, a business usually uses what we call base stock. Let me explain base stock to you so you have an idea of base stock. In a very simplified manner, if that is your trading stock account, if you start off with 100,000 at the beginning, you hope to end off with 100,000 for the next month. This is what we mean by base stock. Whatever you start off the month with, if you sold to the value of 70,000, as you can see here, then it means that you have to purchase 70,000 in order to maintain base stock. So the stock that you start off with at the beginning of the month is the stock you must start off the next month with. That's what we mean by base stock. So obviously, guys, you can clearly see that whatever you have sold is what you need to purchase. So therefore, the importance of understanding the steps in calculating the credit purchases figure. So when we are paying our creditors, like we drew up a debtors collection schedule when it came to the debtors, the receipts from our debtors, by the same token, when we're drawing up our creditors' payments, we need to draw up a creditors' payment schedule. Right? So you got it. Debtors collection, you needed your credit sales. Creditors payment, you need your credit purchases. But it's not just the credit purchases that you require. You will have to use the information that you are given in order to arrive or in order to calculate your credit purchases, and then you will be able to work out your payment to your creditors. So, if this is the question that we have, again, let's ascertain what information do we have. We are told that we have red traders and they are giving us the credit purchases. In other words, they've already given you the credit purchases figure, but don't expect that to happen in the exams. Why? Because generally, in the exams, you're not given the credit purchases as a straightforward figure. You are, in most cases, expected to calculate the credit purchases. And once you've calculated the credit purchases, you can then go on and do the creditor's payment schedule. But in this case here we have the information. There's my actual credit purchases for January, February, and March. And there's my budgeted for April and May. So once again, we have our credit purchases, meaning it's much easier to calculate since you have the credit purchases figure. Okay. You are told that 60% of the purchases are on credit, right? And your creditors are paid after 60 days. That means 2 months after the month of purchase. Okay? That's important. So if we look at our creditors schedule here, payment schedule, we need to ascertain firstly, in February, we purchased goods to the value of 52,000 Rand on credit. Remember, the credit purchases figure you want. Okay? In this case here, we're looking at the 52,000 Rand as the total figure of our purchases, right? But 60% of it is on credit, so you'll take 60% of the 52,000, right? And that will give you, if you take your calculator, and if you take 52,000 times your 60%, you get a figure of 31,200. So you can clearly see, if you bought in February, they told you, you pay 2 months after. So February, March, you're paying in April. How much are you paying in April? 31,200. Okay? Then you look at March, and once again, you find out that your total purchases is 60,000, right? 60% of that figure is on credit, okay? So you'll take 60% of 60,000. We can do it as a straightforward calculation. It would be 36,000 Rand. Let's just check on the calculator if our figure is correct. So we say, take the 60,000 times your 60%, and there you go, 36,000 is correct. So once again, what do we know here? We can see that we took 60% of the 60,000, right? Gave me a figure of 36,000. When am I paying the creditor? 2 months after the month of purchase. So I purchased in March, I will not pay him in April or her in April, I'll pay the amount in May. There's my 36,000 that will be paid in May. So my total payments or my creditors payment schedule looks like this. This is the total payments that I will have to make for my budgeted period of April and May. Now once again, what's important in terms of our calculations? Firstly, look at the budget period. What period are you working for? You're working for the period April to May, right? Number two, which months will impact on April and May? Clearly you can see, if you had bought in January, you would pay February, March is your first payment. So that doesn't affect my budget period. But looking at February, does February impact on my budget period? Certainly it does. Why? You bought in February, right? You will only pay not in March, but in April. Therefore, you see February first payment due in April. Then you look at March. How will you've purchased in March. Will you pay in March? No. Will you pay in April? No. Will you pay in May? Yes. Why? Because that's the terms that you have negotiated with your creditors. Okay, so there's my March payment to be made in May. Clearly you then add up, and this is the total amount that you've drawn up from your creditors payment schedule. And definitely, how is this going to impact on my cash budget? Once again, notice under my cash payments, let's take the 65,000 Rand, which was my total purchases, right? Multiplied by 40%, because obviously if 60% was on credit, 40% has to be on cash. So therefore, you take your 65,000 times 40%. Here we go, 65,000 times my 40%. 65,000 times my 40%. And that gives me a figure of 26,000. Here you can see is my 26,000. There's my 26,000, which is my cash purchases. Now remember, once again, draw a distinction between total purchases, which is the cash component, which is the credit component. Cash component in the month of sale, so in April, there we go, we've got the 26,000. And obviously, if you look at the next one, which was your 70,000, 40% of 70,000 will give you your 28,000. That is, these two figures here, guys, are your cash purchases. Now, once again, how do we remember this? Cash purchases go directly into the cash budget. Obviously, you're going to show your calculations as to how you got those figures. But your payments to your creditors, these figures are coming from where? They are coming from your creditors' payment schedule. Can you see? 31,200. Let's see. There we go. 31,200. What was the next month? May. 36,000. Watch here. There's your 36,000. So once again, if this was being marked in the exams, this is marked. These marks here, the cash purchases, are accuracy marks because the calculation is made in the cash budget. However, your creditors, your payments to your creditors are figures that you are getting from something that you've done already. Remember, you've already drawn up the creditors payment schedule. And because you've drawn up the creditors payment schedule, you're just going to take those figures and transfer them into the main budget. As you can clearly see, with the 31,200 and the 36,000 are amounts that you've already calculated. Okay, so now, if we have to summarize this segment of our lesson, two things would affect your payments: your cash purchases and your payments to your creditors. Cash purchases would be that percentage of your total purchases that were made for cash. Your creditors your payments to your creditors will be dependent on your credit purchases. So take your purchases, break it up into two parts, cash and credit. Got it? Once you've ascertained that, the cash purchases, like you've seen, go straight into the cash budget, the percentage that was purchased for cash. But your payments to your creditors, you now look at the terms of your creditors. What have you agreed with your creditors? You have agreed that you will pay them 2 months after, and therefore you then make the calculation dependent on your calculations. So clearly you can see here that in order to determine your purchases, you will also have to know your sales. Why? Because based on your sales, you will calculate your cost of sales. And once you've ascertained your cost of sales, that will then determine how much goods you have to buy. Right? So I'm sure we've piqued your interest with regards to the creditors payment schedule. You want to know more? Take a quick break and we'll see you just now.